Ben Colman. I'm the Associate Curator for American Art at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and I am coming to you today from my apartment in Detroit to speak for just a few minutes about one of the museum's greatest treasures in its collection of American paintings, Watson and the Shark, created in 1782 by John Singleton Copley, an American artist working in London. The event depicted in this painting really took place. In 1749, Brooke Watson was a 14-year-old sailor working on an English merchant ship docked in Havana Harbor. After jumping into the water to cool off, he was attacked by a shark. Copley places us in the center of the action. Watson, naked in the water, bleeds from a wound to his leg. The enormous shark circles around to bite for a second time. Watson's shipmates on the nearby rowboat are caught up in feverish activity as they try to rescue the young man. It all seems hopeless, but we know that Watson survived. He was rescued by his shipmates, recovered in a Havana hospital, and later in life went on to become one of the leading businessmen and politicians in London of the late 18th century. He's seen here in a portrait etching from 1788. In the 1770s, he contacted the man you see on your screen, the artist John Singleton Copley, to commission a grand narrative history painting depicting the traumatic event of his youth. The commission was a major coup for Copley, who had only recently arrived in London from Boston. In Boston, he had specialized in painting precise and crisply rendered portraits of that city's elite. In London, he found an art world that valued grand narrative history paintings much more highly than it did the portraits on which he built his career in Boston. Over the course of the next several years, Copley painted 3 versions of Watson and the Shark. The first 2 are large horizontal compositions, created in 1778. The third and final is the smaller vertical version of the painting the artist made in 1782, now at the Detroit Institute of Arts. We are so fortunate at the DIA that in addition to the 1782 version of the painting, we have a group of sketches the artist made in the 1770s while preparing to create the earlier 2 pictures. And by studying them alongside the painting, we can see how the artist composed the picture for maximum dramatic effect. We see how he studies the massing of figures and emphatic shadows to focus attention on the singular moment of great danger in the water. We see him deploy his skill as a portrait painter to give realistic, emotional reactions to the faces of his subjects, as if they're responding in real time to the events unfolding in front of them. And we also see details that historians debate to this day. I find it fascinating as a curator and historian of American art that although Watson and the Shark has been studied for generations, we're still able to offer new ideas about the artist's intent. Compare the 2 images on the screen. On the right, in the early cartoon, we see that the figure throwing a rope to Watson is only poorly defined. On the left, in the finished painting, we see that the artist made the decision to represent him as a man of African descent. Perhaps he made this decision to reflect naturalistic detail. Many of the sailors on English merchant ships in the 18th century would have been men of African descent. Perhaps also he had narrative intent with this decision. Notice how he places this man in the center of the action, caught up in a moment of unified activity. Copley painted this picture as movements to abolish slavery were gaining speed, both in the artist's native Boston and in London, where he made his home. Scholars have suggested over the years that he gave this figure such emphatic placement to emphasize the shared humanity of this group. The placement of the event in Havana Harbor is fascinating in its own ways. Havana was one of the great strongholds of the Spanish Empire in the Caribbean, and it was almost as an accident of history that Watson's ship was there at all. The harbor only opened to English sailors after the resolution of the so-called War of Jenkins' Ear between the English and Spanish in 1748. The 3 versions of the painting each have distinctive histories. The earliest, seen here on the screen, now belongs to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. When it was new, Copley submitted this painting for exhibition at the Royal Academy in London. It had such a successful popular reception that it helped to establish his reputation in the competitive art world of London. Perhaps in recognition of this importance, Copley painted a second large-scale version of the picture the same year. This version, now at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, remained in the artist's collection and descended to his son. The final version, created in 1782, now at the Detroit Institute of Arts, is different in meaningful ways from its two predecessors. Scholars have debated for many years why the artist chose, 4 years later, to create a new version of this picture. Perhaps, as some have offered, he used it as an opportunity to experiment with a new vertical composition that heightened the dramatic tension of the event, focusing our eyes on a moment of uncertainty as a sailor points the harpoon at the shark and it's unclear whether Watson will survive. For all of these reasons, I find it very gratifying to study a painting that I know very well and come to find I still have many questions and hope that with time we can offer new answers.